I've been told that this leaf blower is very undesirable, but if that's the case, then why were so many of them sold in the market? You would think most buyers would simply not buy it and instead buy a much more capable one, and this one would have disappeared from the market. But as you can tell, these are a lot more popular than the viewers think they are. However, this one isn't working like it should, so we better fix it. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at this Weed Eater branded leaf blower, and the problem is that not only will it not start, but the pull rope is not working like it should be. It's not the end of the world, you can still use it to try and start the engine, but it is a bit unsightly. So why even bother fixing it then? Well, just remember, this is a brand better known for its string trimmers, but there is a small spot in the market for it. And yes, not many people will be fighting to get their hands on it, but if priced low enough, someone who needs it will buy it. So we did put fuel into the tank in the last video, but for those that didn't see it, here's what happened. While trying to purge the air from the system, it didn't happen, so no fuel made it to the carb and this engine wasn't going to start on its own. But it was in that video that we noticed that the pull rope, which was fully retracted before we started pulling on it, was now not fully retracting anymore. But before we can worry about the pull rope, we still need to know that the engine has the ability to start and run. So for that part, we're going to put some fuel into the carb and see if it starts for us. And fortunately for us, it started and ran, and it even sounded pretty good too. Now we just need to give this blower a quick cleaning before we try and fix it. We do want to pour out all the fuel from the tank just in case water gets into the fuel tank through the fuel line openings. To be honest, this blower isn't all that dirty, however there's more than enough dirt around the carb which we'll need to look at later on. Now because of the shape of the blower, a lot of water will collect in certain spots in the plastics, so be prepared to shake it to get it all out. Drying out this blower would be so much easier if this was summertime, but with it being this cold, it's going to take more time than usual to dry. If you have access to compressed air, it'll help out, or you could use a different blower to help dry this one. Now because of scheduling, it is the next day, and most of the water is all gone, but it's not completely dry. However, it should be more than enough for us to continue with the repairs. Now there's nothing wrong with the pull rope itself, but since we'll be in the neighborhood, we might as well replace the rope too. But as I was getting ready to take the blower apart is when I noticed that there are no screws around the edge of the housing like on the other models I've seen. And instead the housing is sealed, but the lower portion of the housing is now the only part that we can take off. Believe it or not, this is a huge improvement over the older design where we had to take several screws off instead of these 3. And with that lower portion gone, we can then remove the nut and washers for the impeller. Make sure to keep all the hardware organized, that way it'll make it easier to put back together. I think there was some thread locker on that nut because it was a bit difficult to take off the impeller. But after a bit of struggling, it finally came loose. We then get access to the 4 bolts that hold the engine to the housing. So I forgot, we need to disconnect the fuel lines from the carb before we can separate the engine from the housing since the fuel tank is connected to the housing. Otherwise, you could leave them connected, but you'd have to release the fuel tank from the housing. So this design of the recoil is an upgrade from the last one in that the recoil is no longer part of the housing, and instead it's now part of the lower cover for the engine, which is a much better design in my opinion. And the reason why is that you can now retrofit the entire engine and the recoil for a different purpose which you couldn't do before. This can now be used for a small trolling motor or even a bicycle engine without a lot of engineering involved. And with the top cover gone, we can get a better view of the entire engine, which still looks like the old one. After that, we can then separate the bottom cover from it, which is where the recoil is at. So right off the bat, the cover has a lot of dirt inside it, which we'll need to clean up. All that dirt's probably what's keeping the spring from working like it should be, but we'll test that later on. While we have access to the muffler, this would also be a great time to take out the spark arrestor screen for an inspection. If the screen is clogged with carbon, it could affect how the engine runs by restricting exhaust gases from leaving the engine. And after opening the assembly that holds the screen, come to find out it's as clear as it can be, so there's nothing wrong with it. But if yours is clogged with carbon, make sure to clean it, otherwise the blower might not make as much power as it should be. I would also recommend keeping the spark arrestor installed because without it, your engine could start a grass fire, which would not be a good thing. So after working the recoil, I think it might benefit from a light lubrication of the spring just to see if it improves any. Now the spring is really tough to see, but this is the end of the spring and this is where I'm going to spray it at. And after applying the lubricant, work the spring quite a bit to do 2 things. One is lubricating the spring, but it might also clean the spring of any remaining dirt as well. Unfortunately, the lubricant didn't help as much as I was hoping for, so next we'll move on to replacing the rope and also putting one more turn on the spring, which should help retract all the rope. So I did count how many turns it took before the spring stopped, and it was a disappointing 3.5 turns, which I think is kind of low, so one more turn shouldn't hurt it. After pulling all the rope out, I'll then use a clamp and a bolt to hold the pulley from spinning while I take out the old rope and replace it with a new one. There are other ways to replace the rope and to add another turn to the spring, but I find this way much easier. Once we take off the old pull handle and cut a new piece of rope and melt the ends, we'll then fish it back through the opening in the pulley. We'll then put a knot at the end of the rope so it won't come out of the pulley, and then do the same for the handle. So the new rope is about an inch or two longer than the original one, and that's done to help reduce the chances of it breaking. You can choose to make the rope as long as you want, but be careful not to make it too long because it may not all fit on the pulley. And if that happens, the rope could bind up in the clearance for the pulley and the cover. You could make up for the difference by just cutting the rope shorter when installing the pull handle, but that will make the rope shorter than you want it to be. Once the new rope has been installed, we can then release the clamp and see just how much of the rope is pulled back in. And because we counted how many turns it spun before doing this, it'll still be the same, which means we'll still have a couple of inches still hanging out of the cover. What that means is that we'll need to put at least 1 or maybe 2 more turns on the recoil spring to be able to pull back in the last bit of the rope. Unfortunately, to do that, we'll need to remove these 2 metal tabs that keeps the pulley from coming loose from the cover. But after that, we'll then be able to work the rope into this notch in the pulley and then walk the rope in the pulley clockwise to add 1 more turn to the spring. Now this will take a bit of coordination and patience, so take your time and don't let go of the rope. Otherwise, you'll have to start all over adding all the turns back on the spring, which is a real pain to do. But after only 1 more turn, the recoil is now able to pull back in the last bit of the rope, and it now works like it should. But before we put everything back together, we'll take this opportunity to do a bit of maintenance work to the springs and the spacer. Now you don't have to do this, but you might not get this chance again, so we'll take it now. But if the springs do get a bit sticky, it could affect how the recoil works, and you'll end up doing this bit of maintenance work later on. Now for the spacer, we just cleaned it and added some grease to it so it won't get stuck the next time we need to take it off. Once that's done, we then replace the lower plastic portion to the engine and start the reassembly process. Just make sure that the recoil works before you tighten the bolts down for the cover, if not the recoil might bind up. And on top of that, you could damage the cover, and to replace it could cost you all the profits you make from the sale of this blower. Luckily this one is working like it should be, which means we'll tighten down all the bolts for the cover. Just be careful if you use a power tool to help tighten down your fasteners because you could damage the plastics. But if that happens, you have a couple of ways of repairing it, but it'll just mean even more time on a project that may not make you a lot of money. To be quite frank, this blower will still be useful once back up and running, but the experience you gain from working on it is probably worth more than the money you'll get from its sale. So keep that in mind if you have limited time and want the most return for your investment. Now you could apply a thread locker to these machine bolts that holds the housing to the cover if you wanted to, but it's not necessary. But I would, however, come back and check on these bolts to make sure they aren't loose after a couple of hours of use. Now I'm fairly certain that there was a thread locker on the nut for the impeller, but I'm not going to apply any since there's already a lock washer there. But just because I didn't do it doesn't mean you have to do it the same way, so you're welcome to use a thread locker anywhere you feel like it. You're also free to test the recoil anytime during the reassembly process, that way you won't be surprised once you're done. And as you just saw, the recoil is now working better than ever, and it looks much better too with that new rope. And with that problem solved, we just need to look at the fuel system and see if we can get it working without having to replace the carb. This machine is not worth that much, and if we can get it working without having to buy new parts for it, the better. So my question is, would you have replaced the pull rope like I did, or would you have just kept the old one on the machine instead? I know some are going to say I went too far on a cheap machine, but what do you think? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.